fired single dad fed an elderly woman, unaware she was the billionaire who could clear his name. How could one simple act lead to something so unexpected? And what hidden truth could possibly connect these two strangers? Hello everyone, and welcome. We're so glad you're here to share another unforgettable story with us. If you enjoy heartfelt stories about kindness, second chances, and emotional justice, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Your support truly helps us continue bringing meaningful stories to life, and we sincerely appreciate every one of you for being part of this community. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, do you believe one act of kindness can completely change a person's future? Now, settle in, relax, and let's step into the remarkable journey that begins with one quiet decision and changes everything. The cardboard box slipped from Ethan Brooks's hands as security closed the glass doors behind him. The sharp click of the electronic lock echoed through the polished marble lobby, and the fluorescent lights reflected off the smooth floor while a dozen lowered voices buzzed behind the glass. A framed Employee of the Year certificate rested on top of the box beside a family photo of his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, her smile frozen beneath a layer of dust that had settled during another long week of overtime. Ethan bent quietly, picked up a spilled coffee mug without looking back, and brushed a few paper clips from his sleeve. "You know I didn't take it," he said through the glass. His former supervisor avoided his eyes, adjusted an expensive silk tie, and disappeared into the hallway without answering. Ethan stood there for another second until the automatic doors behind him released a rush of humid summer air, carrying the smell of hot asphalt and food trucks from across the street. He took one slow breath, balanced the box against his hip, and walked toward the parking lot where his 12-year-old pickup waited under fading sunlight. The driver's seat creaked as he climbed inside. The air conditioner coughed warm air before falling silent again. On the passenger seat lay a pink backpack decorated with tiny stars. Lily had left it there after school the day before because she loved riding home with her father every afternoon. Ethan reached inside the front pocket and found a folded sheet of paper. In uneven handwriting she had written, "Don't worry, Daddy. Good people always win." He smiled faintly, folded the paper with careful fingers, and slid it into his wallet beside exactly $23 and a worn photograph of his late wife. His phone vibrated. The screen displayed another rejection email before he had even submitted a new application. Somehow the accusation had already spread. He started the engine anyway, the old truck rumbling with a familiar vibration through the steering wheel as he drove across town toward the elementary school. Lily climbed into the truck carrying a stack of library books almost as big as she was. "Did you get off work early?" she asked, fastening her seatbelt. Ethan handed her a chocolate chip cookie from the glove compartment. "Something like that." She looked at him for a long moment, then broke the cookie in half and handed the larger piece back. Neither of them mentioned the cardboard box resting on the back seat. They drove home through streets glowing orange beneath traffic lights, while distant sirens drifted between brick buildings. That evening their small apartment smelled of tomato soup warming on the stove and freshly washed laundry hanging near the window. Lily finished her homework at the kitchen table, while Ethan quietly searched for jobs on an aging laptop whose fan rattled with every click. One application after another ended with the same polite rejection. Near midnight he closed the computer, rubbed his tired eyes, and counted the bills left in his wallet once more. The next morning he promised Lily he would find work before the weekend. After dropping her at school, he walked through downtown carrying only a folder of resumes. Hours passed beneath bright storefront windows and humming neon signs until his stomach tightened with hunger. He stopped outside a small neighborhood diner where the smell of fresh bread drifted through the open door. Just as he reached for the handle, he noticed an elderly woman sitting alone on a weathered wooden bench beside the entrance, her thin hands wrapped around an empty paper cup, her faded gray coat hanging loosely from her shoulders, and although dozens of people passed within a few feet, not one of them slowed down or looked into her eyes. Ethan stood motionless for a heartbeat while the lunchtime crowd streamed past, polished shoes tapping across the concrete sidewalk and restaurant doors swinging open with bursts of warm air, scented with grilled onions, fresh bread, and black coffee. The elderly woman kept both hands around the empty paper cup as though it still held heat. A loose silver strand slipped across her face, but she made no effort to brush it away. Ethan reached into his wallet, counted the bills with his thumb, then looked through the diner's window where a handwritten sign advertised the lunch special for $19.95. His stomach tightened. He quietly folded the remaining bills back into his wallet, pushed open the heavy glass door, and stepped inside. A waitress smiled politely until she noticed the worn folder tucked beneath his arm. "Table for one?" she asked. Ethan glanced toward the window where the elderly woman remained seated on the bench. "Actually, could you pack today's special to go? And add a bowl of chicken soup if that's okay." The waitress entered the order without another question. Steam drifted from the kitchen as pans hissed over open flames. Silverware clinked against ceramic plates, and the smell of melted butter filled the room. When she handed him the bag, Ethan added the last $5 in cash to the tip jar, leaving only a few coins in his pocket. Outside, he walked to the bench and placed the warm bag beside the woman. "Ma'am, they make good soup here," he said gently. "Please don't let it get cold." She looked first at the bag, then at his empty hands. "What about your lunch?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. Ethan smiled faintly. "I've skipped enough meals to know I'll survive another one." She studied his face for several quiet seconds while traffic rolled by and a city bus released a sigh of compressed air at the nearby stop. "Sit with me," she said softly. Ethan hesitated before taking the far end of the weathered bench. The wood felt rough beneath his fingertips, still warm from the afternoon sun. She opened the container slowly, and fragrant steam rose between them. Instead of eating immediately, she broke a dinner roll in half and held one piece toward him. Ethan shook his head. "You should have all of it." She placed the bread gently into his hand anyway. Kindness is easier to receive when it's shared. For the first time that day, Ethan accepted something instead of giving it away. They ate in comfortable silence while pigeons fluttered across the sidewalk and the distant church bell marked another passing hour. After a few careful spoonfuls, the woman folded the napkin across her lap and asked, "Were you dismissed from your job because you were guilty, or because someone decided you were?" Ethan looked down at the soup cup warming his palms. "The company already made up its mind before anyone asked me a single question." "Did you fight?" she continued. "I told the truth," he answered quietly. "Sometimes that's all a man has left." She nodded once, as though weighing every word instead of merely hearing it. Then she reached into the pocket of her faded coat, removed a small fountain pen with a dark blue barrel, and wrote a phone number neatly on the back of his receipt. Folding it in half, she placed it in his hand. "If the world refuses to listen before Friday," she said, meeting his eyes without blinking, "call this number exactly once. Promise me you won't lose it." Ethan looked at the folded receipt, then back at the woman, but before he could ask a single question, she rose with surprising steadiness, adjusted her worn gray coat, and walked away through the crowd, leaving him staring at the ink still drying across the paper as the Friday deadline suddenly became the only thing that mattered. The folded receipt remained in Ethan's shirt pocket as if it carried more weight than the cardboard box waiting in the corner of his apartment. Before sunrise the next morning, the kitchen filled with the gentle hiss of the coffee maker and the smell of toasted bread, while pale blue light filtered through the worn blinds. Lily tied her sneakers, zipped her backpack, and looked at her father over a bowl of oatmeal. "You have another interview today?" she asked. Ethan buttoned his faded plaid shirt, smoothing the wrinkles with his palm. "I'm going to keep knocking until somebody opens a door." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand before hurrying toward the school bus, its brakes squealing outside the building. Ethan watched until the bus disappeared around the corner, then tucked the folded receipt safely behind the clear sleeve of his resume folder and headed downtown. By mid-morning, the sidewalks shimmered beneath the summer sun. Office towers reflected bright flashes of light across polished windows, while revolving doors released waves of cool air, scented with fresh carpet and expensive cologne. Ethan spent hours moving from one reception desk to another. At each office, he offered a firm handshake, a clean resume, and the same quiet explanation that he had never been convicted of anything. Each time the answer arrived with polite smiles that never reached anyone's eyes. "We'll call you. We're moving in another direction. Your background check raises concerns." The final receptionist slid his resume back across the marble counter without even unfolding it. Ethan thanked her anyway, placed the papers back into his folder, and stepped outside where the afternoon heat wrapped around him like a heavy blanket. Instead of going home, he crossed the street to a public library. The air inside smelled of old paper and polished oak, and only the soft tapping of computer keys disturbed the silence. He searched job listings until the screen blurred before his tired eyes. Then he closed the browser, removed the folded receipt from his folder, and stared at the neat handwriting. He remembered the woman's instruction exactly. Not before Friday. He slipped it away again. A promise was still a promise. Leaving the library, he noticed movement across the street. The elderly woman stood near a small flower stand examining white lilies with slow, careful hands. She wore the same faded gray coat, yet this time her posture seemed almost regal despite its simplicity. Ethan crossed during the green light and approached with a warm smile. "I'm glad you're doing well," he said. She turned, recognizing him immediately. "And I'm glad you kept walking instead of giving up." The florist handed her a bouquet wrapped in brown paper. She selected a single white lily, then offered it to Ethan. "For your daughter," she said. "Children remember hope better when they can see it." Ethan accepted the flower carefully so the petals would not bruise. "Thank you," he replied. She studied his face for another quiet moment while nearby traffic hummed and a fountain splashed softly in the plaza. "Tell me something," she said. "If the people who accused you apologized tomorrow but never admitted the truth publicly, would that be enough?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "No, I don't need revenge. I just want my daughter to grow up knowing her father didn't lie." The woman gave one slow nod, almost as though she had been waiting for that exact answer. Without another word, she stepped into a waiting taxi that pulled smoothly away from the curb. Ethan remained standing with the white lily in one hand and his resume folder in the other until a familiar black sedan rolled quietly to the opposite side of the street. Through the tinted rear window, his former supervisor looked directly at him for a brief second before motioning for the driver to stop, then opened the door and began walking straight toward him. His former supervisor stopped just 3 feet away, the scent of expensive cologne mixing with the warm smell of roasted peanuts drifting from a nearby street cart. The afternoon sun flashed across the polished hood of the black sedan while traffic rolled steadily behind them. Ethan remained still, the white lily resting carefully in one hand. "You look like you've had a rough week," the supervisor said with a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Ethan said nothing. The man slipped both hands into his pockets and glanced around the nearly empty plaza before lowering his voice. "You know how these things work. Companies have to protect themselves. Sometimes one person becomes the easiest answer." Ethan tightened his grip on the flower stem. Employer had officially classified his dismissal as termination for misconduct. Ethan stood silently while the paper trembled almost imperceptibly between his fingers. Upstairs, he placed the letter beside the unpaid electric bill, then opened his wallet. Only coins remained. He reached for the folded receipt with the handwritten phone number, holding it beneath the kitchen light without unfolding it completely. Friday was still one day away. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, slid the receipt back into his wallet, and locked it inside the kitchen drawer. Then he picked up his work boots, set them beside the front door, and made a quiet decision. At first light, before making that phone call, he would spend one final day trying to clear his own name with nothing except the truth. Friday arrived with the sharp chime of the kitchen clock and the rich smell of coffee that had been stretched with extra water to make the last grounds last one more morning. Ethan laced his worn work boots, slipped the folded receipt into his shirt pocket, and walked Lily to the school bus beneath a pale golden sunrise. She waved through the dusty window until the bus disappeared around the corner, and only then did Ethan turn toward the downtown headquarters where he had once entered every weekday with confidence. The revolving doors whispered as he stepped inside, cool air carrying the scent of polished stone and fresh lilies from the reception desk. Several former co-workers looked up, then quickly lowered their eyes to computer screens glowing beneath bright ceiling lights. Ethan approached the front desk and laid his employee identification badge on the polished counter. "I'd like to request one final meeting with Human Resources," he said evenly. The receptionist hesitated before making a phone call. Minutes later, a security officer appeared, his black shoes clicking across the marble floor. "Mr. Brooks," he said quietly, "management has instructed us not to allow you beyond the lobby." Ethan nodded once. Then I'll stay right here. He removed a neatly organized folder from beneath his arm and placed copies of his employment records, commendations, and performance reviews across the counter. Please give these to whoever made the decision. They deserve to see the whole picture. The security officer looked at the papers, then at Ethan's calm expression, and after a brief pause gathered the folder without another word. Ethan thanked him and walked back outside into the warm breeze. Across the street, he noticed the elderly woman seated alone at a small cafe, table beneath a striped umbrella, quietly stirring tea while morning sunlight reflected from the silver spoon. She did not wave. She simply watched as Ethan crossed the intersection without approaching her. Instead, he continued down the sidewalk toward the public square where dozens of people hurried through the lunch rush. The elderly woman followed him only with her eyes. Ethan stopped beside a community bulletin board and carefully pinned up a handwritten notice offering handyman services, furniture repairs, and weekend labor. He straightened the corners so the paper would not curl in the wind, then helped an elderly veteran whose grocery bag had split open, kneeling on the warm pavement to gather rolling cans before they reached the street. The veteran thanked him with a firm handshake. Ethan smiled, dusted off his jeans, and continued walking without asking for anything in return. Across the square, the elderly woman quietly folded her newspaper. A black luxury sedan pulled silently to the curb beside her. A sharply dressed driver stepped out, opened the rear door, and leaned down respectfully. "Ma'am, they're waiting for you," he said. She rose slowly, her faded gray coat moving gently in the breeze, and before entering the car, she looked once more toward Ethan, who was helping a young mother lift a heavy stroller up a flight of concrete steps. The driver followed her gaze. "Should we speak with him now?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not yet. A man's character is easiest to recognize when he believes no one important is watching." The sedan pulled away without Ethan ever turning around. Less than an hour later, while he repaired a loose porch railing for an elderly homeowner on the edge of town, his phone vibrated inside his pocket. The unfamiliar number matched the one written on the folded receipt. Ethan climbed carefully down the ladder, wiped sawdust from his hands, stared at the screen for one silent breath, and finally pressed the green button to answer. The call connected before the second ring, and all Ethan could hear at first was the quiet hum of an engine and the faint clink of fine china. "Mr. Brooks," the familiar gentle voice said, "would you be willing to meet me this afternoon?" Ethan brushed the sawdust from his sleeves and looked across the half-finished porch glowing beneath the afternoon sun. "Of course," he answered. "Where?" She gave him an address overlooking the river on the north side of the city and simply added, "Please come exactly as you are." 2 hours later, Ethan parked his aging pickup beside a long row of polished black vehicles lined neatly before a limestone building whose tall windows reflected the late afternoon light like sheets of gold. The entrance doors opened before he reached them. A uniformed attendant greeted him with a respectful nod. "Mr. Brooks, we've been expecting you." Ethan hesitated for only a moment before stepping onto polished oak floors that carried the faint scent of cedar and fresh flowers. Soft piano music drifted through the spacious lobby while sunlight spilled across marble columns. He followed the attendant through quiet hallways until a pair of carved wooden doors swung open. The elderly woman stood beside a wide window overlooking the river. The faded gray coat was gone. In its place, she wore an elegant navy suit, a simple pearl necklace, and the same calm expression he had seen on the weathered bench outside the diner. Several executives rose the moment she entered the room, and the driver who had opened her car door earlier addressed her without hesitation. "Chairwoman Whitmore, everyone is ready." Ethan stopped walking. The room fell completely silent except for the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. The woman smiled warmly. "Please come in, Ethan." He looked from the polished conference table to the men and women standing respectfully around it, then back to her. "You're—" She finished the sentence for him with quiet simplicity. "My name is Evelyn Whitmore." She motioned toward a chair beside her instead of the empty seats across the table. "Please sit next to me." Ethan remained standing for another second before taking the offered seat. Crystal water glasses reflected tiny flashes of light, while leather folders rested neatly before every executive. Evelyn folded her hands gently on the table. "The day you bought me lunch," she said, "I was not testing whether you had money. I already knew you didn't. I wanted to know whether losing everything had changed the kind of man you chose to be. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly before answering. It didn't feel like a test. Good, she replied softly. Because it wasn't. It was simply the truth revealing itself. She reached for a slim folder embossed with the company seal and slid it toward him. Inside lay organizational charts, corporate ownership records, and a photograph of Evelyn standing beside the headquarters where Ethan had once worked. My investment group owns the controlling interest in your former employer, she said. I have the legal authority to examine any internal action taken by that company. Ethan looked up slowly. You can clear my name? Evelyn held his gaze without looking away. If the evidence supports the truth, yes. And if it does not, I will tell you that honestly as well. Ethan closed the folder carefully and placed both hands upon it. Then that's all I've ever wanted. Evelyn nodded once, then turned toward the executives gathered around the table. Her voice remained calm, but every person in the room immediately straightened. Cancel the remainder of today's agenda, she said. Beginning now, every available legal and compliance resource will review Mr. Brooks's dismissal from start to finish. No exceptions. No delays. One executive started to object, but Evelyn raised a single hand. The room became perfectly still. This investigation begins immediately, she said. And before the sun sets, I expect everyone responsible for hiding the truth to be sitting in this building waiting for me. The executive conference room transformed within minutes into a command center, filled with the quiet rhythm of keyboards clicking, printers humming, and legal folders sliding across polished walnut tables. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the last light of afternoon painted the river in shades of copper, while Ethan remained seated exactly where Evelyn had asked him to stay. He watched as attorneys, auditors, and compliance officers moved with calm precision instead of panic. No one raised a voice. No one wasted a step. Evelyn stood at the head of the table, one hand resting lightly against the leather chair, listening as the chief compliance officer placed several thick binders before her. We've completed the preliminary review, he said. The timeline surrounding Mr. Brooks's dismissal contains multiple procedural violations. Evelyn opened the first binder, turning each page slowly. The crisp paper whispered beneath her fingertips. Continue. Another attorney connected a laptop to the large conference display. Security footage appeared on the screen, each frame stamped with precise times. Several internal approvals were entered using executive credentials after normal business hours, he explained. The authorization chain doesn't match company policy. Ethan remained silent. His hands rested calmly on his knees while he listened without interruption. Evelyn glanced toward him only once before returning her attention to the evidence. Bring in everyone who signed these documents, she instructed. Less than 20 minutes later, the conference room doors opened again. Ethan's former supervisor entered first, followed by two senior managers. Their polished shoes echoed sharply against the hardwood floor, but none of them looked toward Ethan. The supervisor attempted a polite smile. Chairwoman Whitmore, I wasn't aware this required your personal attention. Evelyn did not return the smile. She simply gestured toward three empty chairs opposite her. Please sit. The room settled into complete silence except for the distant hum of the air conditioning. A crystal pitcher reflected tiny flashes of evening light across the table. Evelyn folded her hands. Mr. Brooks was dismissed for financial misconduct, she began evenly. You signed the recommendation. The supervisor nodded. Based on the information available at the time. Evelyn turned one page inside the binder. Then explain why your signature approving the termination appears 4 hours before the investigation report was completed. The color faded from his face. He cleared his throat and reached for a glass of water, but his hand paused halfway. There must be some misunderstanding. Evelyn slid a printed document across the table. Company server logs are automatic. They don't misunderstand. One of the managers shifted uneasily in his chair. The leather creaked loudly in the silent room. Evelyn spoke again, her voice neither louder nor colder. You may answer honestly now, or answer under oath later. The choice is yours. No one spoke. Ethan looked only at the tabletop, refusing to interrupt. Seconds stretched into nearly a minute until the second manager slowly removed his reading glasses and placed them beside the folder. We were told the paperwork had already been approved, he admitted quietly. I never saw the full investigation. The supervisor turned sharply toward him. Don't do this. The manager looked back with tired eyes. I'm done protecting decisions that weren't mine. The room became still again. Evelyn closed the binder with a soft, deliberate sound that echoed through the conference room. She stood. Every executive around the table rose with her. She looked directly at Ethan's former supervisor. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all duties pending formal proceedings. She then turned toward Ethan. Mr. Brooks, no final judgment has been issued yet. But beginning tonight, no one in this company will refer to you as the man who was dismissed. From this moment forward, you will be addressed as the employee whose case remains open until the truth is fully established. Ethan slowly stood as well. Across the room, the supervisor lowered his eyes for the first time since Ethan had been escorted from the building, and the balance of power had unmistakably shifted. Morning sunlight poured through the glass walls of the headquarters, casting long bands of gold across the polished marble floor as employees gathered in unusual silence. The familiar murmur of conversations had disappeared, replaced by the soft hum of cameras from the communications team and the steady clicking of leather shoes approaching the executive conference hall. Ethan adjusted the cuffs of his faded plaid shirt, still wearing the same clothes he had worn while searching for work only days before. Beside him, Evelyn Whitmore walked with calm, measured steps, carrying nothing except a slim folder. She paused before the conference room doors and looked toward Ethan. Whatever happens next, she said quietly, stand exactly as you have every day since we met. Let the truth do the talking. The doors opened. More than 50 managers and department leaders turned toward the front of the room. The suspended supervisor sat alone near the far end of the table, his expensive suit now wrinkled, his untouched coffee growing cold beside him. A large monitor illuminated the room with a pale blue glow, while the company's chief legal officer connected a secure presentation. The faint buzz of the projector filled the silence. Evelyn remained standing. We are here to conclude the review of Mr. Ethan Brooks's dismissal. She nodded once toward the legal officer. Time-stamped emails appeared across the screen, followed by financial authorization records and internal server logs. Every document aligned with the timeline already presented. Then security footage quietly played. It showed Ethan leaving his office exactly when company records claimed he had been accessing confidential financial files from another floor. The impossible overlap lingered on the screen. Nobody spoke. The legal officer advanced to the final slide. Independent forensic review confirms Mr. Brooks neither authorized nor performed the transactions used to justify his termination. The official accusation was unsupported. His dismissal violated company policy. The only sound came from the air conditioning flowing gently through the ceiling vents. Evelyn closed the folder in her hands. Effective immediately, she announced, all allegations against Mr. Brooks are withdrawn. His employment record will be fully restored. Every internal and external report referencing misconduct will be corrected today. Several executives lowered their heads. One quietly removed his company badge and placed it on the table without being asked. Ethan's former supervisor slowly rose from his chair. His fingers trembled slightly as he looked across the room. Mr. Brooks, he said, his voice rougher than before, I was wrong. Ethan met his eyes without stepping forward. Then make sure the truth reaches everyone who heard the lie. The supervisor gave a single silent nod. Evelyn turned toward the communications director. Issue the correction before noon. Every employee, every partner, every agency that received the original notice deserves the complete truth. Yes, Chairwoman, came the immediate reply. Moments later, phones throughout the room vibrated almost simultaneously as the official statement was distributed. Around the table, people opened the notification and quietly read the words acknowledging Ethan's complete exoneration. Several employees who had once avoided him now stood and offered respectful handshakes. Ethan accepted each one with the same steady expression he had carried through every rejection. He neither celebrated nor accused anyone. He simply thanked them. Evelyn watched in silence, a faint smile touching her face. As the room slowly emptied, she reached into her portfolio and removed one final envelope sealed with her personal crest. She placed it gently into Ethan's hands. Your name has been cleared, she said. Now it's time we talked about your future. The envelope felt heavier than its thin cream-colored paper should have as Ethan broke the wax seal beneath the warm glow of the conference room lights. Inside rested a formal letter bearing Evelyn Whitmore's signature and the embossed crest of her investment group. The words were simple. His employment would be fully restored if he wished to return, but beneath that offer was another invitation. She was establishing a new ethics and employee trust office across every company she owned, and she wanted Ethan to lead it. The room remained quiet except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock and the distant murmur of the river beyond the windows. Ethan read the letter once, then carefully folded it. "Why me?" he asked. Evelyn walked toward the same window where she had first revealed her identity. Afternoon sunlight shimmered across the water, and the scent of fresh lilies drifted from a nearby arrangement. "Because when you believed you had nothing left," she answered softly, "you still chose to feed a stranger instead of yourself. Credentials can be verified. Character reveals itself." Ethan lowered his eyes for a moment before extending his hand. "Then I'd be honored to serve." Evelyn accepted the handshake with a warm smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Brooks." 2 weeks later, the headquarters lobby looked different. Employees paused to greet Ethan by name as he crossed the polished marble floor carrying only a leather notebook instead of a cardboard box. The security officer who had once escorted him outside offered a respectful nod. The receptionist smiled before he even reached the desk. In his new office, sunlight spilled across oak shelves that were still mostly empty except for one framed photograph of Lily holding the white lily that had bloomed beautifully on their kitchen table. That afternoon, Ethan picked her up from school. She climbed into the old pickup, now freshly washed, and noticed he was wearing a company identification badge again. "Did they finally believe you?" she asked, fastening her seat belt. Ethan looked at her through the windshield where golden leaves drifted gently across the parking lot. "They believed the truth," he replied. "There's a difference." Lily reached into her backpack and handed him another folded note. In careful handwriting she had written, "I told you good people always win." Ethan laughed quietly, placed the note beside the first one in his wallet, and drove toward the small neighborhood diner. Inside, the familiar waitress recognized him immediately. The smell of fresh bread and chicken soup filled the room just as it had on the day everything changed. Ethan ordered 2 meals to go and paid for them before walking outside. Across the street, another elderly man sat alone on a weathered bench, staring into an empty paper cup. Without hesitation, Ethan crossed the sidewalk and placed the warm meal beside him with the same quiet smile. From the opposite corner, Evelyn watched through the window of a waiting car. She did not wave. She simply closed her eyes for a brief second, grateful that wealth had allowed her to clear an innocent man's name, but kindness had shown her exactly which man deserved that chance. As the evening sun settled behind the buildings and father and daughter walked home together beneath the fading light, Ethan understood that the meal he thought had cost him his last few dollars had become the priceless moment that restored his name, his future, and his dignity, because the greatest fortunes in life always recognize the quiet courage of a good heart.